There's a number that almost no one talks about when they sign their mortgage papers. Not the interest rate, not the down payment, not even the monthly payment. It's the number that tells you how much of your life you are actually trading for the house. And when you run the math, really run it, the answer is disturbing enough to make you question one of the most sacred beliefs in American financial life. The idea that buying a house and waiting is the surest path to a comfortable retirement is not just incomplete. In many cases, for many people, it is a financial trap designed to look like a ladder. So let's talk about what's actually happening. The conventional story goes like this: rent is dead money. A mortgage builds equity. Home values always rise. Pay it off before you retire, and you've made it. This is the core of American middle-class financial planning. Politicians have repeated it across administrations. Banks have built empires on it. And for one specific generation, under one specific set of conditions, it actually worked spectacularly. But the conditions that made it work have been quietly rotting for decades, and the narrative has refused to update itself. Here's the deeper truth: the homeownership ideology that dominates American life was not born from historical wisdom or financial analysis. It was manufactured, deliberately, by a combination of government policy, real estate industry lobbying, and post-war political economics, and then sold to the public as natural law. Let's go back to the root. From the 1930s through the 1960s, Congress enacted several new federal policies and programs that institutionalized the long-term, fixed rate, fully amortizing mortgage, which in turn fueled the post-World War high housing boom. The Washington Post before this. Homeownership in America looked very different. Mortgages were short-term, 5 to 7 years, often with large balloon payments at the end. Then the Great Depression wiped out the financial system, and the government decided to intervene. It created the Homeowners Loan Corporation, the Federal Housing Administration, and eventually Fannie Mae, all designed to get money flowing into housing again. The 30-year mortgage was a revolution, a stark contrast to the short-term loans that had been the norm until then. It put homeownership within the reach of many more families. It made perfect sense at a time when 25% of workers were jobless and a third of the lost jobs were in construction and related trades. Kickstarting housing was a smart piece of economic stimulus. So, here's what's critical to understand: this was not a discovery of some timeless financial truth. It was an emergency stimulus measure, a policy choice, a lever pulled during an economic crisis to create jobs and restore confidence. It worked so well that it was never unwound. Instead, it became the mythology. In 1942, President Roosevelt tied homeownership to a spirit of strength and optimism, saying that a nation of homeowners was unconquerable. The daily beast by the time the GI Bill arrived in 1944, offering veterans low-wage rest, government-backed mortgages with zero down payments. The deal was sealed. By 1952, 2.4 million veterans had received government-backed loans. A new class of homeowners was born, and because this generation bought early, in cheap markets, with cheap money, and held for decades, many of them did build enormous wealth. An original Levitt Ranch home bought in 1950 for $8 sold for nearly $300 in 2015, a 600% nominal return. That generation became the proof of concept, and the proof of concept became the ideology, and the ideology became invisible, so embedded in American culture that questioning it started to feel like questioning gravity. But here's where the institutional mechanics get interesting. The real estate industry, the banking sector, and the government did not simply observe that homeownership builds wealth and then celebrate it. They actively constructed the conditions for that belief to persist regardless of whether those conditions still held. By the mid-1960s, mortgage interest tax deduction alone was costing the U.S. Treasury $7 billion per year. By 1984, that subsidy had grown to $53 billion, nearly 5 times all direct federal housing expenditures. The deduction was pitched as a benefit for ordinary Americans. But the math said otherwise. The larger your mortgage, the larger your income, the larger the benefit. The poorest Americans, who could not itemize deductions, received nothing. The wealthiest received the most. This was not a subsidy for wealth building. It was a subsidy for wealth concentration, dressed in the language of the American dream. Meanwhile, the narrative machine kept running. Bill Clinton set out to create 8 million homeowners. George W. Bush promised another 5.5 million. In 2002, Bush declared that if you own your own home, you are realizing the American dream. Time every administration, Democrat or Republican, treated the homeownership rate as a social good and treated every obstacle to it as a problem to be solved with more leverage, looser credit, and lower down payments. The 2008 financial crisis was the logical endpoint of that trajectory. $17 trillion of household wealth was destroyed. Millions of families were left underwater on homes that had been sold to them as the safest investment they could make. and yet the narrative survived. Now look at the arithmetic that very few people discussed before they saw it. The average annual hidden costs of owning and maintaining a typical single-family home in the U.S. amount to $21 for 120-25, according to Bankrate's analysis, covering property taxes, homeowners insurance, utilities, internet costs, and maintenance. Bankrate, that's over $1.700 per month, on top of your mortgage. Insurance premiums alone have surged 48% in the past 5 years, outpacing household income growth. It's a low group, and this is before accounting for the single most invisible cost in the entire equation, opportunity cost. Here is how opportunity cost works in housing. When you buy a median-priced American home today, you're required to make a down payment typically in the range of $50 to $100 or more. That capital is not merely spent. Here's why. It cannot be invested. It cannot compound. And compounding is not a minor detail, it is the engine of long-term wealth. The S&P 500 has delivered an average annual return of 10.39%, or roughly 8% adjusted for inflation, between 1992 and 2024. Over the same period, the U.S. housing market provided a 5.5% nominal rate of return, so well before you account for property taxes, maintenance, insurance, and transaction costs. Equities have historically outperformed residential real estate. After you account for those costs, the gap becomes significant. This is not an argument that housing can never be a good investment. It can be, under the right conditions. Rental properties with positive cash flow, purchased in markets with strong employment fundamentals. Leverage responsibly, those can build wealth. The argument is about the primary residence, the house you live in, the one you're told to buy as early as possible, hold forever, and call your retirement plan. That vehicle has a structural problem that the standard narrative does not acknowledge. It is simultaneously your largest investment and your largest consumer expense. You cannot eat your equity while you live in the house. Point survey of over 1.0 homeowners aged 50 and older found that, among those not yet retired, nearly 30% lack confidence in their ability to retire on time or at all, and about half of people who attempt to tap their home equity through traditional financing cannot. Point read that again. The primary wealth-building vehicle for millions of American households, the thing that was supposed to carry them into retirement, turns out to be largely illiquid when they need it most. Selling the home means finding somewhere else to live. Taking a reverse mortgage means navigating a product that most financial advisors treat with caution. Refinancing at retirement age, on a fixed income, requires income verification that many retirees cannot produce. The wealth is there, on paper. The cash is not. Research from the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College finds that homeownership has financial value only for some of the most privileged retirees, who are mostly white. While off retirees can benefit from selling and cashing in on equity to fund nursing home care or assisted living, which can cost $55 to $100 or more a year. For them, house is a form of informal long-term care insurance. Center for Retirement Research for the rest. The picture is more complicated. Half of baby boomer retirees are still making mortgage payments, in a very different situation than their parents' generation, when most retirees own their homes outright. Now overlay the current market reality, and the situation becomes genuinely alarming for younger generations. As of early 2025, home prices are up 60% since 2019, with the median existing single-family home price hitting a new high of $412, $524, 5 times the median household income, significantly above the price-to-income ratio of 3 that has traditionally been considered affordable. Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, according to the National Association of Home Builders, around 74.9% of U.S. households, roughly 100.6 million, are unable to afford a median-price new home in 2025. National Association of Home Builders, and those who do manage to buy are doing so under conditions that fundamentally reshape the financial calculus. 60% of millennials have adjusted their retirement plans in response to rising housing costs, with 35% citing housing costs as their biggest barrier to retirement readiness. Nationwide, the median first-time homebuyer is now 38 years old, up from 28 in 1991. That means a 30-year mortgage is paid off at 68. Assuming no refinancing, no job loss, no divorce, no major illness, and the window for compounding returns in a retirement account, the window that financial planners call the most critical years of wealth accumulation, is compressed by the enormous cash outflow of homeownership in the primary years. What is the underlying principle at work here? American economic policy has consistently prioritized asset price inflation over wage growth and productive investment. When housing prices rise, existing homeowners feel wealthier. They spend more. Consumer confidence goes up. Politicians look competent. Banks extend more credit against rising collateral. The entire system has an incentive to keep house prices high, which means it has an incentive to keep the narrative alive, even as the math quietly changes. The homeownership ideology is, in part, a story that asset owners tell themselves and each other to justify a system that benefits them. And it has been told so long, and so loudly, by institutions with so much power and so much to gain, that it has become structurally difficult to question, even when the evidence demands it. What this means today is urgent and specific. If you bought a home in 1975 or 1985, in a cheap market, with a cheap mortgage, and you held it through the appreciation cycles of the 90 seconds and 1,000 seconds, homeownership worked as advertised. If you were trying to buy a primary residence in 2025, at prices 5 times median income, with mortgage rates still more than double what they were in 2020, then call it your retirement plan, you may be following a map that was drawn for a different territory entirely. On average, renting is cheaper than paying a mortgage in all 50 of the largest U.S. metros in 2025, with the cost difference between the two growing in 38 metros since last year. Bank rate the opportunity cost of the down payment, deployed instead into a diversified portfolio and compounded over 30 years, can represent a meaningfully different retirement outcome depending on the market, the timeline, and the individual's tax situation. This does not mean never buy a home. It means know what you are buying. Know what problem it is solving. Buy it because you want to build a life in a place. Because you have the stability and the cash cushion to absorb the hidden costs. Because it makes sense for your specific financial situation, not because a post-war government stimulus program became a cultural religion and nobody updated the scripture. The most dangerous financial beliefs are the ones that were true once, for some people, under specific conditions, and then got elevated into universal laws. The housing market did not become a trap overnight. They became one gradually, as prices outpaced wages, as hidden costs compounded, as liquidity dried up, and as a generation of buyers kept telling itself that the rules that applied to their parents would apply to them. They will not. The house can still be a home. Whether it should be a retirement plan is a different question entirely, and it deserves an honest answer.